This is Coalition of Willing, the stories of the daring doers of deeds, the people prepared to step into the arena. My name's Greg Cobber-Rogers and I'm your host. These stories, they're not perfect, they're not polished, they're not even certain, but they are willing. Come along, join the herd. Coalition of Willing is the show that's about the doers of deeds and those that are willing to step into the arena. And in this, the very first episode, it is appropriate that I have one guest only, a man who has done a remarkable lot throughout the course of his career, and ultimately is the reason that I'm sitting here with him today. Welcome to the herd, Matthew Birney.
Thanks, Cobber. Doer of deeds and the man in the arena sounds a lot like a Theodore Roosevelt quote that I must say is probably my favourite quote. But great to be here on your brand new podcast, Cobber, that I'm sure is going to be wildly successful.
Appreciate that. And the first thing, Matt, is to obviously connect it all together, because I don't know if you can recall, but Coalition of Willing as a phrase, you first said to me at Club Croesus, and I know that we might have an audience that might not quite get some of these reference points, but back at your house in Kalgoorlie, one evening we were shooting the breeze, playing pool badly, probably having a soda water, and you used this phrase, Coalition of Willing, and it's just always stuck with me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick full circle. So Coalition of Willing, what was it in the moment that you said it? Can you remember what it was that you were referring it to?
Yeah, well, look, I can't take the credit for the phrase Coalition of the Willing. I'm pretty sure John Howard first coined the phrase when we all went into, was it Iraq at the time? And so, all of the allies would loosely term the Coalition of the Willing. And then a mate of mine, Glenn Colgan, stockbroker in Kalgoorlie, and I got together and formed a lunch of businessmen in Kalgoorlie that sort of started at midday and finished at midnight, probably once every couple of months. And we termed that the Coalition of the Willing, or the Cow Lunch. And so that's where the phrase came from. But I'm pretty sure I stole it off John Howard anyway.
And now I've stolen it off of you.
And you've stolen it off me, yes.
So it lives on. Let's
lives
just
on.
say that there is the different groups of coalition. Obviously, that's the key word there, the now. And
those lunches, by the way, were pretty cool. We used to do all sorts of stuff. We would have, we would bet on mice that were racing in a specially built track, or we would bet on crazy crabs that were racing. And by the way, we let them all go into the local dams. And basically anything we could find a bet on over the lunch, we did it. And, when you see Kalgoorlie businessmen at a lunch, 2 or 3 bottles in, the wallet comes out in a big way. And they were very memorable lunches, the Coalition of the Willing lunches.
They were willing lunches.
They were willing.
Very,
right?
very willing, yes. And also interesting that, as you said, that the man in the arena, the famous Teddy Roosevelt speech, I've connected that with Coalition of Willing, and it's almost the premise of the show is that talking to those people who basically fit what he talks about. It's not the critic that counts. It is the man that's willing to step into the arena. And I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I know that.
I know you can if you want. I know it well.
All right. So, Matt Birney, man in the arena.
Well, he who tries and knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, and who spends himself in pursuit of an achievement, at best knows the triumph of that achievement, and at worst fails while daring, his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory or defeat. Theodore Roosevelt.
There you go. Fantastic.
And that's you, Cobber. That's you, right?
Well, that's the show, and they're the people we're going to speak to. And, certainly, Matt, might be a little bit of a challenge for you to sort of sit within that, but it's without question that does describe you, because we're going to talk about a career, Kalgoorlie, school, business, into politics, into corporate, back into business, and to develop what you've developed within WA from a business, a presence, a profile within the economy. You have been in the arena, a number of different arenas, and there has been the the triumphs, the victories, but there's also been the erring and the mistakes made. And that's the stuff we want to explore today. So we're going to go a little bit all over the shop here. It is unscripted, again, deliberately, but we want to understand a little bit more about what makes you willing. Why do you keep stepping into the arena? So let's go back to Cal, because that's where it essentially all started, right? Now, you weren't actually born in Kalgoorlie, but you were raised in Kalgoorlie. And we're talking a different Kalgoorlie, Matt, both of us being Kalgoorlie boys than we, back in our day, completely different place to what it is now, which a little bit disappointing in some ways because it was a great place to grow up.
Oh, look, Kalgoorlie is an amazing place to grow up, and the fondest memories I have now as a 50-something-year-old are growing up in Kalgoorlie, and probably in my teenage years when, we all had big V8 cars that, you just don't see one these days. In fact, the car that I sold for $10,000 back then, an SLR 5000 for your Motorhead listeners, these days is worth about $140,000. So had I kept that car, it'd be worth 140 grand. But, Hannon Street in the middle of Kalgoorlie on a Thursday night, everybody was there with their big hot V8 car. Every last cent that we earned at the time got spent on the cars, and we would parade them up and down Hannon Street on a Thursday night, and then we'd be there again on a Saturday morning. And, of course, we'd all park at the top end of town, and everybody would be sitting on the bonnets of their cars. In fact, I remember once I was sitting up there with a guy called Nigel Boleyn that people would remember out of Kalgoorlie, good
Nigel,
fellow.
yes.
Had a really hot HR Holden, a black HR Holden. He'd spent more money on it than we all earned, I think. And we were parked at the top end of Hannon Street. We were out the front of the Sylvester's nightclub owned by Ashok Parekh at the time, albeit we didn't really know Ashok then. I think we were only 17. And Birney and I were sitting on the bonnet of his HR, and a man came out of the nightclub. He was a real man with a moustache, and we were 17. And Birney actually was sort of leaning on the other guy's car, and I was leaning on Birney's car. And the guy came out and he said to Birney, "Get off that car, you fat bastard." And of course, we'd had a few drinks by then, and I said to the guy, "He's not that fat." And then the next thing I remember was waking up on the pavement, and you see those cartoons of the little Tweety bird, and you see the stars. I literally saw the Tweety bird and the stars, and so as it turns out, he'd given me a good old Kalgoorlie connector, and it was lights out. but in my defence, he was a man, and I was really a boy. But that was the sort of rough and tumble of Kalgoorlie back in the day.
Oh, if we play with the words, so you might have been willing, but you weren't able at that stage. So yeah, look, it was as you said, it was a great time to grow up. The bog laps that we used to do in Kalgoorlie, as you said, Sylvester's nightclub, just an institution. But Matt, one thing that wasn't so willing for you was school, right? It was not something that you were sort of particularly good at. Although clearly there is there are intelligence, there's smarts that have been developed over time, but school for you was what?
Oh look, I was probably an average student that chose the wrong subjects in high school. I was doing maths 2, 3, physics, chemistry, English literature, and accounting. I don't know how else to remember that. And the English I did particularly well at. Maths I was pretty good at, but physics and chemistry might as well be written in Egyptian. Why I chose those two subjects, I don't know. But look, I was probably an average student, and maybe in some cases above average, particularly with English and maths. But the harder stuff was hard. And my plan was to go on and be a lawyer. That was sort of what I had in my mind, and ended up quitting school halfway through year 12, and went and got a job working for Coventry's, the big auto parts business in fact, Westland Autos first of all, the Ford dealer, and then on to Coventry's. And then by the age of 21, I'd set up my own auto parts business. So, a very different route to wanting to be a lawyer to setting up a spare parts business. But, that led to a lot of other things. And instead of, I ended up making laws instead of defending them in the end as a politician. So, it wasn't a bad route to take in the end, but you don't know it at the time, right?
So let's circle back, because of course your father was a lawyer himself and also served in federal government.
Yeah, he was in the Malcolm Fraser government. Wasn't a big fan of Malcolm Fraser, but he was in his government. Yeah.
Okay. So you've got it in your mind, you're at school, you're studying, and maybe it's that legal stuff. What changed? Why leave?
Oh, well, I had a bust up with Mum at the time because I wasn't allowed to go to Esperance with the boys, because I was the only one of all of our mates that had stayed on in school pretty much, and everybody else had gone and got apprenticeships and jobs and cars and girlfriends and all of those good things. And there was a big trip planned to Esperance, and I sort of might have told Mum a porky pie and ended up down in Esperance when I was meant to be out the bush camping. And so, hothead me, when I got back, Mum had discovered that I'd gone to Esperance, and I said, that's it, had enough of all this, quitting school and all of that sort of stuff. And so, you occasionally you do things that you regret, and I may well have regretted that, but in the end I didn't.
Yep.
But if my kids are watching, you should regret that, right?
So the ultimatum was that's it, you've got to go and get a job. Is that where it went?
Yeah, I did. I went and got a job, yeah. And look, I mean, we were into cars, as I said, and so I got a job in the spare parts department of Westland Autos. It was run by a guy called Alan Rudwick at the time. He'd worked for that company for 57 years.
Mm-hmm.
Grumpy old bugger, but he was a genius when it came to spare parts. And I remember the first day I got there, he sent me down to, there was a client at the front counter, and we didn't have the part that he wanted. And so he used to call me Junior. He said, Junior, go down to Coventry's and get this part. And Coventry's was a good 2 kilometres away, maybe 3 kilometres. And so I just started walking down to Coventry's. Took like an hour round trip to get there and back. And when I got back, the client was gone, and old Rudwick was absolutely furious. Where have you been? I said, I went to Coventry's. And he didn't realise I didn't have a driver's licence at the time.
Gotcha. Yep.
Or a car, mind you.
Yep.
And so in the end, it wasn't long I got my licence, and then they gave me a company car, so I felt pretty flash at 17 with a company car. It was a Ford Courier Ute.
Yes.
And everybody in the business was crazy jealous that they'd given me a company car. I think the owner, Mick Hales, sort of thought maybe I'll take over from Alan Rudwick at some stage, because he was sort of 1 foot out. And, all the mechanics and all the other guys were all jealous that I had a company car that I could actually take home. And so I used to protect it with my life. And one Friday, the owner, Mick Hales, used to have drinks for, some heavyweight people around town. And an old fellow, Oscar Milling, really terrific old bloke, Scott Milling's father,
yes,
you'd know Scott.
Yes.
He showed up in his beat-up old Land Cruiser and parked it out in the car park in front of my ute. And Oscar got a skinful, and instead of putting it into first when he took off, I think he hit reverse and he ploughed the front of the ute in. And so, that was as a 17-year-old with this privileged company car, having to report to to the management that the ute's been stoved in was particularly difficult. But thank God it was a friend of the owner, so I sort of got off. But I was pretty nervous for a while.
So just quickly, we're just going to go back and just finish off the school stuff. So you're right. Back then, a lot of mates at year 10, year 11 level jumped out of school, but they were going into the apprenticeships or they were going into the traineeships. You had it in your mind that maybe it was the legal field you wanted to go down. When it was time to leave, was there not consideration about getting to a job with you? As you said, you loved your cars. Was there not that call to do something along those lines?
Well, no, I wasn't very good at fixing things, to be honest. I liked to drive cars, and I like to pay other people to fix them, but I wasn't that good at fixing them, and I wouldn't have been very good in the trade in any case.
Yep. Okay.
And so, when the university path closed for me, there was a period there where I was just floating, working for Westland Autos, and then I got a job working for Coventry's. And that ultimately led to, a few other things, because when I worked for Coventry's, I was a sales rep for Coventry's. I was only, I think, 18 or maybe 19, something like that. And they gave me a company car as well, an XF Falcon. It was pretty cool. And I used to drive up to Leonora, Laverton every Tuesday selling, parts to all the big players up there. And Sullivan's Garage, owned by Jamie Sullivan, who you'd know well. Good Goldfields boy. I used to call on Jamie. I was only, very young bloke, and Jamie was, sort of ruling the roost in Leonora at the time with the Sullivan's Garage and all the associated businesses. And I would sell him some light globes and some filters and things, and then he'd tell me, his latest opinion about ASX listed companies, and my ears pricked up. And basically every time I went to Sullivan's Garage, I got the order out the way as quickly as I could, and then I sort of bled him dry for his opinion on different ASX listed companies.
Okay.
And then on one occasion, I thought I've got to start buying some shares, and so I think at the time there was a stockbroker in Hannon Street that I think was only what I now know to be a sophisticated investor stockbroker, even though they didn't have that exact rule back then. And I literally just walked past the reception. And I saw the guy over in his office and walked straight into his office. I was so uneducated, I didn't realise you've got to stop at reception, ask the guys there, and the broker said, "Oh no, we only deal with high end people and all that." And I think you could see the embarrassment on my face. And he said, "Oh, all right, what do you want to do?" And so I started buying a few shares, based on Jamie's opinion, and then all of a sudden I made $10,000. And, I think I was 19, a fair bit of money back then.
Yes.
So, I don't know what year that was, but it's a long time ago. And I ended up going to Rockingham and buying this SLR 5000 with a 308 motor, stroked out to a 334 and a Saginaw gearbox and all this cool stuff. And
All done by someone else.
Yeah, all done by somebody else, yeah. And brought it back to Kalgoorlie, and that was the start of the heyday, from sort of 18 through to 25, and we were all on fire, having a lot of fun and building a big friendship group, and all that.
And so from that, you're in that particular industry doing those roles. What comes next is the first step into entrepreneur business. How did that come about, and did you see in yourself a fundamental or change in your in the way you thought about things? I didn't know about the share stuff before, so very early on you were looking at, okay, hang on, there's a way to perhaps create some extra income or some wealth. What was it that made you go, I can do this, and I'm going to go and do this? And of course, we're talking the Goldfields Auto Spares.
Yeah, so when I was working for Coventry's, Coventry's had so much gear that they were really the only place in town to go. But, for whatever reason, their operation was terrible. The joke around Kalgoorlie was, if you're going to go to Coventry's, take your pillow, because you're going to have a sleep on the counter before they get to you.
Right.
And it became more than a joke. It was serious. People just hated going to Coventry's. And so I don't know why my entrepreneurial brain switched on or whatever the case may be, but I sort of thought to myself, well, maybe, I could start an auto parts business sort of in competition with Coventry's. Mm-hmm. We would never take them on fully because they're too big, but just with crazy good service. And my mate at the time, Darryl Black, was a mechanic, and so we put our heads together and we said, yeah, let's do this. And so we ended up renting a side room at Darryl's dad, Murray Black, who was, I've got to say, was exceptionally helpful to us all those years ago. And he's sort of a hardcore, no-nonsense businessman, and he's the exact kind of guy who would love to see young blokes doing well.
Yes.
And so he rented, I don't even know if we had paid any rent, to be honest, but in the side of his service station, there used to be a cafe there, and so we gutted that and we started Goldfields Auto Spares. We didn't have any real money though, and so we went down to a big company called Amcap in Perth. They were Coventry's opposition. Yes. And cut a very long story short, we convinced them to give us, I don't know what the number was, I think it was like $120,000 worth of stock on consignment, which is amazing, really. Like, I don't know who would do that these days.
Yes.
And so, we got cracking, and, we had all this stock there, and we got a couple of mini mokes with no roof on them, and I think a couple of good-looking blonde delivery drivers, and we were a thing, it was happening. And Now we got the fastest car in the Southern Hemisphere delivered to the front door. You know, it was a bit of a stunt to open the shop, and you know we had these big flags on the mini mokes, and you know all of a sudden we were super well known. And of course, anybody who was into cars in those days, we knew them, and so
Yep.
you know the business went well, but it was pretty hard paying that consignment stock back because AMCAP kept cutting off our account every month when we couldn't pay. And so we ended up running our stock down in order to, you know, sort of pay AMCAP's bill. And in the end, we had almost no stock, but we still had a business, and then we slowly rebuilt it from there, if you know what I mean.
So
Sorry, and the point is, I sold my SLR 5000 to pay for, to pay for some of the fittings and fixtures and bits and pieces, and so that was the end of the SLR 5000. I traded it for a business.
So you're fully committed, you're fully in. But as you said, you're still, 20, 21 at that
Yeah,
stage?
they were 21 at the time we started it. Yeah.
So, again, from a business acumen perspective and business knowledge, and this is how you should do things, you've got Murray there helping you out as well. How did the decisions get made? You got a partner, so how did that all work? How were decisions made around this is what we're going to do? How did you build it? Were you out there knocking on doors?
Well, look, in the early days, it was a pretty good partnership because I knew spare parts backwards. I'd learnt it at Coventry's, and I was pretty good at it. And Blackie was a mechanic, so he knew a car back to front, and so it was a pretty good pairing, really. But you know, because there was only two of us, we didn't want to put any staff on at that point in time. We ended up having quite a few staff, but I was doing the debtors and creditors, and you know.
That school accounting?
Yeah, like bush accounting. And so I'm still a bush accountant, right? And so, I recommend anybody who gets going in business, do your own debtors and creditors so you fully understand how a chart of accounts works, how a general ledger works, how you move stuff, in that general ledger. But don't do it forever because it's not a good use of your talent to be doing the books, but do it to start with, so you can get a handle on all of those things. And I think that was really important. I didn't realise how important it was at the time. I just thought, well, I'll do the books, right?
Yep.
And to be honest, I did them for too long. I should have put on a bookkeeper way before I did, but gave me a fundamental understanding of how a business works, how a P&L works, how a balance sheet works.
Good tip for everyone listening.
Yeah, and I still kept, I've still got that understanding today.
Okay. And then it starts to grow. When do you? Was there a moment when you thought this is something? We've got something here. What's next? Do we just stay the way we are? How do we build it? I guess what I'm trying to tap into. You talked about the mini mokes and the fastest car. You always had a flair. You've always wanted to do things a bit more, I guess, outrageous than others. So again, where do you think that was coming from?
Yeah, look, I don't know. I guess we were just having fun, really. It was great fun. We were we'd managed to fund this business somehow, and we were on fire. To start with, it was hard because we were trying to pay AMCAP back. But in the end, we promised AMCAP we'd pay them in 12 months. I think we paid them in 18 months. Now, 120 grand back then might be something like 400 grand today. Who can pay a 400 grand loan off in 18 months? Yes. So, even though we felt it was hard, we were doing pretty well to do that. But you learn pretty quickly that, if you're not attracting attention, you're not attracting people's money either. And it's a good lesson for people in today's social media world. You see people who've, too scared to put themselves out there on social media, because the comment section fills up with a few lunatic comments and things. But, my advice to people is, social media is the new black, right? And so if you're going to have a crack, you've got to do it on social media, and you've got to be prepared to put yourself out there, and you've got to be prepared to cop a bit of criticism. But the way around that is just have a bit of fun when you're doing it. And I guess in many ways I was hardened with a political career where, as soon as you get elected, half the population hates you because they support the Labor Party and the other half loves you. It's the same thing now with social media, right? So we didn't do anything by halves. In those early days, we were all in. We were fascinated with the business world. We were loving getting some attention, making some money, and it was terrific. It was really good fun.
A couple of interesting bits just to cover off on there. So an interesting analogy you're saying about that whole social media bit, because again, it fits with the premise of the show. You've got to get in the arena. You've got to get a bit of dust. You've got to get a bit of blood. You've got to get a couple of slaps before you perhaps actually get to where you want to get to. But you were enjoying it that much, it was almost like water off a duck's back. So you're there, you're building the business, it's doing well. We're talking pre-internet days. There is no social media, that type of thing. Were there people at that stage, Matt, in your business journey and your own personal development journey who you looked to or looked up to or went to advice? I mean, these days we all talk about having mentors and coaches and getting people into trainers into certain things. What was happening in that space for you back then?
Yeah, people often ask me that. I can't think of anybody that I thought was a mentor. Maybe, Murray Black wasn't a mentor, but we didn't do anything big without talking to him first.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was a pretty good guide of what's sensible and what's not. But in terms of just somebody that was my business mentor, I don't know. It seems like a bit of a woke concept these days that everybody wants to say this person's my mentor. I don't know. You just have a crack and do it, and see how you go.
Have a crack. I love that. Also fits with what we're talking about. And you did take Goldfields Auto Spares to having a real red hot crack go. You can fill me in a moment on just sort of the size it got, but you also then have obviously picked up this. I can pick gaps in businesses because you did a few other things, not quite to the same level that Goldfields Auto Spares were. But you did a couple of other things where there were clear gaps in the market. A couple of them you were in and out quite quick. Others you built a bit more. So again, where do you think that came from, like given the background?
Oh, well, look, when you get into business at 21, it's your whole world, right? You're feverish about it. You're researching, you're talking. It is your whole world. And, yeah, you're right. I did a couple of other things. When there was a industrial subdivision that came up in West Kalgoorlie, there was a 2,000 square metre block of land. We'd made a little bit of money by then. So Blackie and I bought that block of land, and I had a sort of a vague plan or a vague idea that there was a gap in the market in so much as tradesmen were sort of stuck between not being able to afford to rent a big shed and running out of their garden shed, and the missus is getting crazy because the stuff's everywhere and we're talking about people who might go out on site and, weld up gates or fences or, concreters or, prospectors or whatever. And we thought, well, there is a gap in the market for those people, can't afford a big shed, working at the garden shed. And so I had this idea that we would divide that block of land into 14 little mini sheds, basically. And we put a road down the middle, 7 on either side. And they were literally just colour-bond sheds. You probably fit 3 cars side by side, little concrete apron out the front, small yard with blue metal, rolled in and that sort of stuff. And so we built them and rented them out almost instantly. There was almost 100% occupancy and ran it for, I can't remember how long we ran it for, might have been a couple of years, and then flogged it basically at full occupancy. I started another business in Kalgoorlie by the name of Essential Earth.
Remember that one?
International franchise owned by Farouk Khan, a friend of mine now, who's in the sort of ASX world these days. And Essential Earth was competition to the Body Shop. A lot of people listening would know the Body Shop, women's, hair care and facial creams and all that. And Essential Earth, a little, sort of black with an orange E logo, had started up in competition with the Body Shop. And in Kalgoorlie, women just weren't catered for, right? It was sort of a man's town. But when you looked at the stats, I think it was about 50% of the people in Kalgoorlie were women. And so we took over a shop in the middle of the endowment block in Hannon Street. And in those days, you'd have to cut off your right arm and sell your grandmother and your firstborn to get into that endowment block, which is the main Hannon Street. You just couldn't get one. But I had heard that Hox Hi-Fi, Keith Hockley, was moving out of there and going out to Bold Road because he needed a much bigger shop. And I went to see him and I said, "Is it true? Are you moving?" He said, "Yes, I am." I said, "Well, how can I take over your lease?" And he said, "Well, you pay me $20,000, which I may or may not have done." And anyway, cut a long story short, I ended up taking over that lease, and we fitted this thing out within an inch of its life with black butt parquetry and sandstone pillars out the front. which, by the way, fell off the truck when they arrived, and so they never quite looked as good as they should have. And it was a beautiful, beautiful shop. And my girlfriend at the time, Lisa, was running the shop, and it was all right. Didn't make a lot of money, to be honest, but, it was a pretty cool-looking shop. And, there was enough in the till, on a Friday for me to sort of jump over the buzzer while Lisa was out the back in the office and sort of open the till and then head over to the Kalgoorlie Hotel and put the money on the bar, but that was about it.
So you're now a businessman in Kalgoorlie Goldfields. You've really got that entrepreneurial thing happening. You've built Goldfields Auto Spares to be the biggest independent, I think, in Western Australia.
Yeah, well, eventually we bought a block of land on Boulder Road, moved out of Murray's service station. I think must have been a half-acre block of land in a key spot, and we decided to build a really big shop.
The Big Blue Castle.
Yeah, well, I had a meeting set with the architect the night before, I don't know, I was sort of having a bit of a dream about having a castle. And so when I went to see the architect the next day, I said, because it was one of those concrete tilt-ups that you see everywhere, and they literally just raised the concrete walls. And I said to the architect, can we make it a castle? He goes, what do you mean a castle? And anyway, it turns out you can, because when you create the concrete moulding, you just do these sort of,
cutouts.
And it was a corner block. So we managed to make it, the front and the side literally was a castle. And I thought, well, let's paint it fluorescent blue. And so it became the Big Blue Castle, and it became a landmark in Kalgoorlie.
Yes.
I know the paint shop across the road used to run ads on 6kg radio saying just across the road from the Big Blue Castle, and people all in that vicinity became the landmark. And so, once again, we didn't do things by halves. It was pretty cool. And at the time, it was the biggest privately owned auto parts business in Western Australia. There was one in Geraldton at the time called Mac One, and there was some debate about whether his was 1 metre bigger than ours or not, but never proven, so we still claim that title.
So you've got all that going on. So what's happening inside of Matt Birney, though, that suddenly there's this enormous pivot? Business into politics.
Yeah, what did happen? Well, I don't know why, because even though my dad was a politician, I hadn't met him until I turned like 18 or something, and he was well out of politics then. So, people say, oh, you followed your dad's footsteps. Well, I didn't really, because I hadn't really met him until I turned 18. It was more of a Kalgoorlie thing, right? So by that stage, we were well entrenched in Kalgoorlie society as young business people. I was on the board of the Chamber of Commerce, and, I was almost born and bred in Kalgoorlie. I'd been there since I was 6 months old, and we were very feverish about Kalgoorlie. And at the time, I had mates, Angus Moffat and Brett Nazari and Russell Collette and Daniel Sutton, and all these guys were either owning their own businesses or doing really well in others. And we were all very keen, Kalgoorlie long-term people. And I actually remember the pivot. If you want to know what that period was,
Absolutely.
or what that pivot was, we were at the Exchange Hotel. All of us, I don't know if all those guys were there, but there was quite all of our mates were there on a Friday night, and the news came on the TV in the bar, and it was about a $40 million funding package from the state government for Bunbury, and all of us parochial guys are going, well, why the hell does Bunbury get
Where's the money
all
for
this
Kalgoorlie?
money?
Yes.
Kalgoorlie produces all the wealth through the mines, and Bunbury gets all the bloody money. So, I don't know, during the course of the night, maybe after the 12th or 13th beer, we came to the conclusion that Kalgoorlie never gets any money because it had been held by the same political party for all of history, that being the Labor Party. And so if the Labor Party was in state government, they wouldn't commit any money to Kalgoorlie, because why would they? They'd won it for all of history.
Safe, yeah.
And equally, if the Liberal Party was in government, they wouldn't commit any money to Kalgoorlie, because why would they? They've never won it in all of history. And so as a result, this big wealth-producing beast of a thing called Kalgoorlie never got any money coming back. And so we all decided, oh, well, we'll go and join the Liberal Party. And I think there was like 6 or 7 old dears in there with grey rinse hair and stuff, fighting over who's going to sell the raffle tickets on Saturday, and all these young blokes sort of flooded in. and took over the place. And for my sins, I became the branch president. And then we flooded God knows how many people in as members. No one knew a thing about politics, but everybody was passionate about Kalgoorlie. And that year we won the National Liberal Party Branch of the Year. So we flew to Melbourne and, John Howard and Peter Costello presented us with the trophy for the best branch of the year.
Possibly going, and who are these blokes again?
Well, the funny thing is, again, I sort of grew up in a sheltered world and didn't really have a full handle on how things work, but I'd been told that we'd won the branch of the year, and I wrote a speech that I think probably, resulted in half of the southwest forest being knocked down. And I realise now it's the sort of thing where you shake John Howard's hand and thank you very much, and then you go sit back down again. But I didn't fully understand. So I got called up on the stage in Melbourne. There's Howard and Costello both on the stage. Howard shakes my hand, and I take the microphone, I pull out this speech. I don't know how many pages long, but it's bloody embarrassing when I think about it. Right? And so when you see the vision, this speech goes on and on. There's Howard on my right and Costello on my left, and they're sort of trying hard not to roll their eyes,
yes.
get this kid off the bloody stage. But
that was your moment.
Yeah, and then wasn't that long, and there was an election. And so, I drew the short straw. My name went on the ballot, and I became the first Liberal in history to win the seat of Kalgoorlie.
The short straw. That's surely not the story.
Oh, no, it's a short straw because nobody ever wanted to stand for seats that have never been won before, right? So it was a short straw.
Okay. So at this point, you're saying that you didn't necessarily have that desire to go into politics.
Oh, well, I wouldn't have put my name on the ballot if I didn't, but, it had never been won by the Liberal Party before, but I had sort of built this branch and built this enthusiasm, so it was obvious I had to have the crack.
Okay. So was there a belief then that we're going to do this, we're going to turn this around, or that wasn't? It was more a case of we just want to show up?
Well, look, if I'm really honest, I would say that it was my naivety that led me to believe and to get others to believe that we could win that seat. Because, if what I know about politics now would lead me to say to somebody, not a chance am I standing for that seat. Never been won by the Liberals.
Yes.
And even when I became the leader of the Liberal Party, I had to go out and try and find these poor buggers and convince them to stand for a hardcore Labor seat, knowing they're not going to win, right? And when I think about it now, I was probably the bunny at the time that they need someone to stand for the seat of Kalgoorlie. But because I didn't fully understand the concept of safe seats, I didn't fully understand that we couldn't win it, and I didn't go into it with that mindset. And we'd built a big head of steam and, big team of people with the yellow Matt Birney Liberal T-shirts every Saturday morning in the main street and all of that. And again, it's the momentum that carries you. And, I owe so much to those people that gathered around me that said none of us knew much about politics, but all of us cared about Kalgoorlie. And all of us were just enthusiastic and all of us were too naive to understand the concept of a safe Labor seat can't be won. And history now records that I did win it. And, at the time, the Court Liberal government got thrown out. There was a 7% swing against the Liberal Party statewide, and the swing in Kalgoorlie was 7%, but the other direction. We got a 7% swing to the Liberal Party, and I won by 1%. So, I literally fell over the line.
You got the cake, but the icing got taken away from you. You went straight from potentially being in government to being in opposition.
Yeah, but that's probably better, to be honest, because you can cut your teeth in opposition a lot better.
But knowing Matt Birney, can you say that there was a moment when you went, I can't lose. I'm not going to lose this, because you are a winner. You're willing to take up the fight. Confidence, belief. Or was that not the case? We're going to go through the process and whatever it is, or we're going out and we're going to win this thing. What was it?
I think it was more about the journey. So many people were enthused and excited about, this new thing called politics that no one had ever been involved in before. And, we were a thing and it was exciting. And I think you sort of get swept up with the excitement of it all, and you don't really stop to think, can I win it or can't I win it? But I must say there was a moment on election night, so I had all the crew at the Hannans Club. There would have been 150 people in yellow Matt Birney T-shirts at the Hannans Club, and we were watching the TV. Kerry O'Brien was on ABC, and he was going through all the big cat ministers, Liberal ministers that had fallen over. Court's gone. Well, Court didn't lose his seat, but he lost the election. Kirra's gone. Shave's gone. These are all big, competent ministers. But what's this? It looks like the Liberals are going to win Kalgoorlie, right? And, the roof gets raised. It's the most amazing feeling. And then the phone rings and, well, actually, probably before the phone rang, but before that the phone rang and Brett Nazari was my campaign manager. He was scribing on the board. And the Boulder polling booth numbers came in and they were woeful. The Labor Party had absolutely smashed me. And I remember at the time looking around, everybody was sunburnt. I just noticed it at that time. And I thought, you bloody idiot, you've got all these people fired up and enthused. And look at the numbers. I can't remember the numbers, like 1,800 Labor, 900 Liberal, something like that. And it's just awful, right? And you think, oh, God, you're an idiot. What have you done? And then the Hannon's primary school booth came in and it was almost the same but in reverse. And then the roof lifted off, right? And then they just started coming in and, it ended up being pretty good. But, I often say politics is the highest highs and the lowest lows.
Yes.
And it's true.
So it was a remarkable victory, as you said, first time ever that it had changed. At whatever point it was that you've gone, well, I am now a parliamentarian, I'm in politics. How did that sit with you?
Well, I also at some point became the Shadow Minister for Police that all of my mates thought was a bit hilarious, given my driving record wasn't the best with
always in the shadows.
Yeah, with the SLR 5000.
Shadow Minister for Police.
Shadow Minister for
probably
Police.
fitted well, yeah.
But look, it was exciting. I was the only new boy on the block during that election. Like when I came to the Parliament, I was the only person that won a seat off the Labor Party. So I was literally the only new Liberal, and I was the youngest by a country mile. So a lot of the white-headed old guys sort of, took me under their wing, and people like Norman Moore and George Cash, they were great. You talk mentors. I mean, they probably were a political mentor for me.
Mentors, yeah. Okay. So let's circle back now to Year 12 high school, doing the subjects, English you're quite good at. So it's not that you're not intelligent to a degree. It's just that you don't have
Depends who you ask.
enough fire in the belly to do that. What are we now drawing on back here? So we're now in politics with the Shadow Minister. It's a new opposition. Were there stuff that you were drawing on from back there, so that skills, that intelligence, whatever, or was it all brand new learning that you had to go through?
Two things. So turns out I've got an eye for detail, and I'm good at detail, and I do detail, and curiosity. I'm naturally curious. Those two things, I think, even in the business world, have held me in good stead. I do detail and I'm curious. And, you often come across people in business and, you might give them a sort of a detailed summary of what you're looking for or what you're trying to achieve. And you can just tell at some point the eyes are glazed over and they don't ask you anywhere near enough questions. And so you can tell that's a non-detail person,
yes,
right? And that's not me. So if I'm in, a business environment and I've got a client trying to explain their company to me, I am listening intently and I'm picking up on what they're putting down and I'm feeding it back to them. And when I got into Parliament, I found that I was very good at reading legislation and even writing legislation. At some point I wrote the daylight saving laws. And so I'm the granddaddy of daylight saving in Western Australia. That piece of legislation that I wrote and got through the Parliament resulted in 3 wonderful years of daylight saving in Western Australia. But anyway, back to your point, I was good at doing the detail. And so, there's a thing called consideration in detail in Parliament where the cameras are all gone and there's no press there and you're just pulling apart the law and putting it back together again. And I found I was pretty good at that and I really enjoyed doing that, pivoting on what a word actually means.
Yes.
And even in today's AI world, that's probably held me in pretty good stead because it's all about prompting now and individual words and how the AI is going to take the word or not take the word. And I guess it harks back to my English literature days at high school. So, I've always been pretty good at English and pretty good at doing detail.
Okay. So transferable skills from managing, leading in business to managing and leading within a government or, a parliamentary structure? Yeah,
pretty similar. Well, I mean, in the public company world, because I'm in the sort of public company space these days, albeit from an investor public relations perspective. But, in the public company world, you've got a board, and I have been I've been chairman of a couple of public companies and director of one. You've got a board. In the political world, you've got a cabinet or a shadow cabinet, both of which are always very restrictive on the managing director or the leader. And, in the public company world, you've got shareholders. And, if you ignore them, you do so at your own peril. In the political arena, you've got voters, and of course you can't ignore them. In the public company world, you've got donors who, in the political world, you've got donors that you need. In the public company world, you've got stockbrokers and investors. So lots of crossovers between those two worlds. But ultimately, I loved my time in politics, but I'm one of the few that chose to actually leave. Most politicians get carried out in a box eventually, but I'd got to where I, as far as I could go there, and I said, right, that'll do. I'll go off and do some other things, and I did.
So I could talk to you forever, but we're starting to get towards where we need to move it along a bit. But just finishing out that, you were seen as a little bit of the messiah when you were elevated into that leader's role. People did see you, well, certainly publicly, that was the persona that they gave you, that you were the messiah, the slightly little boy, a little bit cheeky, a little young, the new blood. How was that when you're in politics, but now you're the leader of the opposition of the WA Liberal Party?
Yeah, look, I don't know if I was the messiah. I was probably just a very naughty boy, to coin a phrase. But, I think the point of difference was I wasn't a typical politician, and that's because I hadn't really followed politics. I didn't really know how to behave. And so, again, I think I just brought a bit of fun to it. And, I was, we were hunting and tracking the Labor Party, and, we were waiting for them every Sunday with a press conference to give them a whack for a bit of information that we'd found. And even in Parliament, again, because I do detail, we were finding speeches that, our opponents had made 15 years prior, and we're feeding back their words, or we're running motions against them in the Parliament. And that caused a lot of commotion in the media world, right?
Yes.
You don't see a lot of it these days. Basil Zentler's probably doing a bit of it now and doing quite well, but up until Basil, there hasn't really been people who have been feverishly out there, hunting and tracking the Labor Party, right? And I love doing it, to be honest.
So we're getting back to the sort of, this is, you were willing to step into the arena and take up the fight. You don't mind a bit of a fight.
Oh, yeah, and look, in politics, you've got to have a fight, right? The problem is there are a lot of conservative Liberals and older people in the party when I took over, and if some environmental green group came out and attacked me for something I'd said or done, they would think, that's a problem. And I'm trying to convince everyone that's not a problem, right? If we're true to our own politics, we're centre-right, we don't have to be afraid of having a fight with left-wing people, right? In fact, it's to be encouraged. I remember once there was an iron ore mine out near Southern Cross, and these sort of environmentalists had found this plant called a tetratheca plant, had the rarest DNA in the world, and they were trying to stop the expansion of the iron ore mine, and it was big news. They're going to stop it because of this rare tetratheca plant. Now, I was also the Shadow Minister of the Goldfields region, and so I said to the mining company, I said, I'll come out and have a look. And so I get out there one day, and the press all knew I was going out, and I have a look at this tetratheca plant, and he says, look, the DNA isn't rare. It's just that all of these plants have different DNA because wherever they are in the world, they suck up different nutrients, right? So it's just a furphy to say that this is rare DNA. Anyway, when I got home, I got a call from, I think it was the Sunday Times. It was Sunday Times saying, what did you think about this rare plant? I said, well, let's put it this way. If I found one in my backyard, I would go into my shed, I would get my spade out, and I'd dig it out and I'd throw it in the bin. Anyway, so on the Sunday in the Sunday Times, big headlines, Birney calls rare plant a weed. Anyway, all the environmentalists decided to blockade Parliament House the next day. On the Tuesday we had Parliament. And I get a call from a couple of my colleagues saying there's all these hairy, armpitted, purple-headed people blockading the entrance to Parliament looking for you. And they're stopping every car. If it's not you, they're letting them in, but they're waiting for you. I said, okay, all right. So I drive up to Parliament. There they all are, blockading the driveway. And so I drove up the curb, up the footpath, and over the rose bushes, and I flattened a few rose bushes and parked in my spot and went inside.
Adding to it.
They're all still standing there, right? And so outrage, right? But there's nothing wrong with fighting people as long as you're fighting the right people, right?
Yeah. Could there have, I mean, I know there was that moment, a challenge of seat and all that sort of stuff, but was there a moment when, yes, this is what's going to be my career, or do you genuinely think you would have jumped out at some stage?
Well, no. So the very first day I arrived, I got called over to the Liberal table in Parliament, and there were a few white-headed blokes there who'd been there for years and years and years. And one of the things I picked up is that they were filthy on the world. They hated the staff, hated the Labor Party with real hate, not just competitive hate. They hated people in their electorate, the pains that keep ringing them all the time, and yet they would stand again for the next election. And I thought at the time, note to self, like don't ever get to that point
right,
where you become institutionalised and you hate everybody around you, but you put your name on the ballot again. And I got to a point at the end where I said, well, I've been there and done that, and off I go now.
Okay.
I think I left when I was 38 or something like that. 39.
With no regrets. So we come into another pivot in life. You actually then went back old school to your parts world for a period of time as an employee, but then came another period of that business, that entrepreneurship that just obviously was always still there bubbling away inside you. And we're talking about you were into your Vend West and you were doing your Magnum boats, which you might have to leave because that'll take a long time to explain. But that was amazing that you actually designed, built and brought into Australia a 35-foot boat. But I guess it lands with Bulls and Bears, which is where you are now. And again, interestingly, a gap in the market that you saw that there's lots of people doing stuff, but no one's quite doing it this way.
Yeah, so Bulls and Bears has been a great business. I've loved it. Been doing it now for, I think, 13, 14 years. Terrific people, terrific industry. So Bulls and Bears is something of a hybrid between a public relations, investor relations firm and a financial news outlet. We're in partnership with all the big media outlets across the country. We write articles for ASX listed companies, and we draw on years of markets experience, geological experience, and put together really good news articles. Now they are our clients and they do pay us, but we write it independently. The client, we don't show it to them first. We write it how we see it, and then we publish it online in the biggest outlets like the West Australian newspaper, the Business News, who we started with all those years ago, Sydney Morning Herald, Melbourne Age, Brisbane Times. And then I pivoted into a radio show interview where I'll interview an ASX CEO most days, and it goes to air on 6PR in Perth, 2GB in Sydney, 3AW in Melbourne, 4BC in Brisbane. And so it's effectively mainstream media coverage for mostly small to mid-cap ASX listed companies. But I'm proud of the content that we put out. It's not written by kids, right? We've got ex-stockbrokers, ex-geologists, people who've been in markets for 20 and 30 years. And we're really, really good at adhering to a particular style when we pull a public company to pieces and put it back together, and then it gets published across the country. And that was a gap in the market because there were PR firms who sort of had to ring newspapers or radio stations and try and beg to get news coverage. And for a long time, the journos in this country just had no interest in small to mid-cap companies. They wanted to report on BHP or Woodside or the big players, whereas there's a massive following for small-cap companies out there. And we sort of bridged that gap. And we've now got a big team of people, and it's been a very successful business, probably my most successful. But more importantly, I love the clientele because all of our clients are CEOs of ASX listed companies, and they're all mini entrepreneurs. They've all made, I don't know, $5 million, $3 million, $6 million. They're all trying to make 50 or 60 or 100 million, and they're all experts in their field. And so I've had the privilege of having them in my boardroom every few days. And, I'm like a sponge. As I said, I do detail, and, I could talk fluently now about basically any mineral, for instance, whether it's gold or nickel or lithium or rare earths. I could keep up with most geologists in that space because I've had the privilege of sucking information out of all these ASX CEOs, and it's been a great journey and continues to be. And we've got a few more plans in place.
Excellent. Got a couple more things we need to cover off. This is the first episode of Coalition of the Willing, and it could only be you that you be here, so we might just have to extend this one outside of our normal episode parameters. But just a couple of things to title again. So again, you saw the opportunity, you started doing it yourself, you built it, then identified ways to grow the business itself to now become almost, again, a major player, a bit like the Goldfields Auto Spares. So it's not exactly the same as the others, but it holds its place in the marketplace. What is that? What is that about you that you can see that?
Oh, I don't know, to be honest. I've always tried to be authentic, right? So we're not trying to be somebody I'm not or something I'm not. And, and I think, again, a lot of it comes back to, being able to get into somebody's head, particularly a client's head, and understand what it is they're trying to achieve and then work your hardest to actually achieve it. Whereas, don't just take on 10 or 20% of what they're saying and add your own 80%. I mean, I've always, and I try and instill this in our staff, when we get into that boardroom, let's listen for phrases that, a CEO is using multiple times because it's clearly, how they see their own business. But again, let's break things down and do the detail and get it out there. And we've got a really good product. I'm proud of our product. There's nobody in the country that writes like we do. We've built a style guide over 14 years. I've added to that document for 14 years, and it's exactly how you should pull apart an ASX-listed company, how you analyse it, how you put it back together, how you put it into how you use grammar and words to, create some interest on the page. And, as I said, I'm proud of the product. It's a very good product. But I'm, these days, I'm spending a fair bit of time on client relationships because I enjoy it. I enjoy meeting good people that are doing interesting things, that are proactive and entrepreneurial. So this is this
curiosity factor?
Yeah, I think, but also, when you get a bit older, your priorities change a little bit from, making money to building relationships, right? And, I enjoy doing that. And, from time to time I might have, I think I can fit 18 people around the dining room at my house. And from time to time I fill that dining room with ASX CEOs, and we get a great chef in and some good wine, and I've got to kick him out at about midnight. After lunch that starts at 1 o'clock. But I enjoy doing that. Yeah.
You've done a lot of things throughout your career that some people would say, well, you must have felt uncomfortable about doing what you're doing. Did that come from Kalgoorlie? That sort of, let's call it, sort of rougher environment sort of thing, or is that something that you've developed as a trait, as a behaviour over the course of your career? Yeah,
look, I don't know. I mean, Kalgoorlie is certainly a great, grounding place for anybody because it is pretty rough and tumble, and, you are who you are, and you make your way based on your own sort of set of values and personality. And so, I think, if I had to sheet home any success that I might have had, it certainly started in Kalgoorlie.
Yep.
And developed from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one other thing, the schooling we spoke about, clearly you are an intelligent person.
Oh, you changed your mind. You said I was stupid a while ago.
Eye for detail, your ability to retain information, your curiosity puts you as someone that does have a high degree of intelligence, particularly cognitive ability, like your how you take something on, the speed that you take stuff on. We've talked about this before. You did have a little bit of a dabble at going back to getting a qualification, which was another one of those ones in the arena that you had to go, well, I'm not going to walk out of here with it. You look at someone like your young fella, Charlie, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but should we have something in our school system that's more adept to the stuff that you've gone through your life that you could have gone back and said, if they were teaching me that, now that's different?
Yeah, so, I mean, and I do see things through the lens of Charlie. He's in year 12 now, and he's doing business courses. He's interested in business. He's a bright kid too. And, when I look at the certificate 4 that he's doing in business in year 12, and I look at, some of the units that they're teaching them, I'm not seeing a lot of correlation between what you do in the real world when you're running a business. There's a lot of, I don't know, workplace health and safety and how to deal with conflict in the workplace. It's sort of all these woke concepts, right? I mean, teach them how to use MyOb, or teach them how to build an advanced Excel spreadsheet, or, teach them how to cold call, which is the single biggest secret to business. And it's annoying, to be honest, when you see, I call it wokeness. It's sort of a form of wokeness that's crept into these curriculums where it's all about the warm and fuzzy stuff and not enough about the hardcore stuff. But my other bugbear is AI, right? So AI is going to rule the world. It's already starting to do that. And, whereas in the past, employers would say, well, what university did you come from first, and then what course did you do second? Most of them are now saying, well, what experience do you have with AI, right? And, I'm trying really hard to teach Charlie about AI. I'd like to teach my daughter that too.
Yes.
But, she's not interested in AI, but she's got a lot of other interests that are ultimately going to work out well for her. But, for people who want to be in business, AI is everything, and you should be learning it, consuming it, taking it to bed at night, and I've been doing that.
Yep.
And I reckon I'm a sort of a mini expert on AI now.
One thing I also know about you is that in terms of, we talked about before about those mentors, coaches, heroes, people that you look to, YouTube's your biggest thing, isn't it? You believe that there's pretty much not anything you need to know that's on YouTube.
Yeah. Look, YouTube has revolutionised the media space. And when you think about it, it's genius, but it's simple genius, right? Like, eventually gets to know the things that you like, and it just keeps feeding them up to you. And there are people out there who can't necessarily get on to CNN or Fox News, but they've still got some really interesting things to say. And, I reckon now for 18 months, it's driving my whole family mad, but for 18 months now, I've come home from work and I put on YouTube and I watch AI videos, right? Mm-hmm. Because I've determined that this is going to rule the world, and, it won't be AI that takes your job. It'll be somebody who's taught themselves AI that takes your job, is my favourite saying. And if you don't want to learn it, you're going to get left behind. And for 18 months now, I've been putting on these tech bro, YouTube videos. The guy with his cap on backwards who, has spent 50 hours learning this latest tool, and in 1 hour I can learn it by watching him. And, I've done a lot of that, and I'm really enjoying it, to be honest. I'm finding it super interesting, but YouTube is certainly the catalyst for it.
Okay. Matty, we need to get to wrapping this up. Bit of a stereotypical type question, I guess, but biggest lesson, if you had to say to someone, look, watch out for this, because if it happens in your life, that's going to be the lesson that you need more than anything else. Yeah,
I don't know so much about a lesson like that, but if you said to me, what's the secret to success in business?
Secret success?
Which I think is where you're sort of going. It comes down to 2 words, and it's cold calling. And
wow.
So, for anybody who's looking at starting a business or who's in a business, I say to them, get over yourself when it comes to cold calling. Enjoy it. Have fun when you're ringing people. Don't read from a script. Connect with them. And when they tell you to piss off, just piss off and move on to the next one. And, so after starting multiple businesses over multiple years, that's my key learning, is don't be afraid of cold calling. And, and in fact, if you can get to a point where you can laugh at yourself, if the guy was particularly mean to you and particularly rude to you and hung up on you, if you can get to a point where you can laugh at that scenario, it means you can move on to the next one. And if I look at all of my businesses, they've been built with cold calling.
Well, Matt, look, it's been a fascinating conversation. I could sit and talk with you for hours because your story is remarkable. You're certainly someone who fits. You've been in the arena so many times, mostly walking out with the triumphs, but sometimes also the lessons learned, the mistakes made. The absolute only person who could be the first guest on Coalition of the Willing. So thank you. Coalition of the Willing, talking with Matt Birney. Come join the herd, share, subscribe, and we'll be back with our next guest who is willing to step into the arena. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Cobber. And Coalition of the Willing, the best goddamn business podcast out there. How's that?
That was very good. Yeah, for the outro. Thank you very much. Again, thanks, Matt.
Good on you, Cobber.
My name's Greg Cobber Rogers, and I'm your host. These stories, they're not perfect, they're not polished, they're not even certain, but they are willing. We drop episodes fortnightly. Come and join the herd.